Welcome to Heller Hurwicz Office Hours, a podcast featuring University of Minnesota affiliated economists and their research. In this special series of the podcast, we're focusing on the policy priorities of the second Trump administration and how research can inform our understanding of a rapidly changing economic environment. Artificial intelligence is reshaping industries faster than policymakers can respond, transforming productivity, business models, and the nature of our work. As the use of the technology accelerates, many questions are being raised about who benefits, who might be displaced, and how labor markets will adapt and change. In this episode, Professor Kyle Herkenhoff will discuss his research on the topic and what these trends could mean for workers, innovation, and the future of employment. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Chris. So I came into this field as an expert in labor economics and a bit of an outsider on technology adoption. And it was purely for a selfish reason. I wanted to know if the types of models that I worked with, cyclical unemployment fluctuations, were all about to basically be put in the trash can, and what we needed to think about was structural unemployment. So
this with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, is job displacement going to be permanent at this point for a greater swath of Americans?
Right. So before we dive into that, what do you mean by artificial intelligence? So when you're putting it into your models, when you're thinking about it, because there's all kinds of sort of definitions or things you can put into artificial intelligence.
I had a feeling you would ask that, and many people have asked that question. The census has a definition, so they survey about 800,000 firms every year to get a sense of who's using AI and for what purposes. And their definition is artificial intelligence is a branch of computer science devoted to making machines intelligent. And then they go on to define intelligent. Intelligence is that quality that enables an entity to perceive, analyze, determine response, and act appropriately in its environment. So that's a pretty broad definition of what AI is. Of course, when you ask somebody, a business owner or a small firm owner, what are you using AI? There's a whole lot of gray zone, right? Maybe your employees are using it to answer emails. Maybe you're using it in some of your production. So then they try to be more specific about this when they do surveys, and they ask, are you using it as part of the process or methods of production? Okay, so that's what I'm really thinking about. These firms take these algorithms, these machines, these predictive algorithms, and they're using them in production.
And then how widespread, what is your sense? How widespread is the adoption of artificial intelligence? I mean, is this more than we realize? Is it, I remember back in the days with a lot of technological development, the examples would always be the same. You know, it was Walmart, it was GE, it was Home Depot, and it didn't trickle down much farther below that. And then all of a sudden the internet just changed the whole dynamic. So when you're looking at this artificial intelligence, is this deep within corporate America now?
Yeah, it feels a bit like 1992. And let me say why that is. Okay, so the census runs a survey, 800,000 firms. They run another survey called the Business Trends and Outlook Survey that does another 1.2 million firms. That's more up to date, and you'll get a range. As of 2023, people would say something like 3 to 4% of firms are adopting AI in the census's definition. And I should say something here before we get any further. I am speaking for myself and not the Census Bureau or the Federal Reserve. I am just speaking for myself. But their definition, you would have 3 to 4% of firms using it. But then if you employment weight that, you say how many workers are actually affected. Those are big firms. Like you said, they are the making up fictitious examples, the Walmarts of the world, okay? And that affects about 20% of workers. But then if you fast forward, you look at more recent statistics, it's something like 12% of firms. So that is looking like the computer, the convexity of that computer adoption in its industry during the 1990s. And it seems like it affects a far greater segment of workers than the number of firms that have adopted, precisely for the point you've made. These are costly technologies. How costly will they be, though? That's where this differs from computers, perhaps, in that a lot of these algorithms, once they're built, they're pretty cheap to rent out. And so when you look at workers and you ask workers, how many workers are using AI, or they say in a survey they're using AI, it's upwards of 50 to 60% will say, I am using it in some way, shape, or form for stuff around my job.
So, and as you mentioned, there's an apocalyptic tone to much of the discussion about the labor market and AI, mass unemployment. Now, historians of technology typically push back and they say, look, we've seen this before. The IBM mainframe was going to lead to massive unemployment. So they have a tone of skepticism there. But nevertheless, there is this deep concern.
You are right. And my concern for the sets of models that I work with led me down this path. Let me give you a fact. Okay, so I do a lot of research in the Census Bureau. The University of Minnesota has a great relationship with the U.S. Census Bureau. We host one of the federal research data centers here, and I'm a researcher there. And I have access to that ABS microdata, the annual business survey, that big survey of 800,000 firms, high quality cross-sectional data. So of the most recent ABS survey, among those who adopted AI, okay, so firms, respondents, they say, I adopted AI, I use it somewhere in my production of goods and services. 36% of those firms said my intent of adopting the AI was to automate tasks performed by labor. That's the number of firms. And then you say, how many workers, how many bodies of those people, if you employment weighted, what's the number? It goes up to 60%. 60% say that's the intent, is to automate tasks performed by labor. The question is now, you go back to 1982, 1993, you ask one of these firms that's adopting computers for the first time, why are you doing it? What's your intent? I would be hard pressed to believe that, 30 to 60% of them are saying to automate tasks performed by labor. I think it was simply there were some tasks that we couldn't do in the past and now we can. And the question is that going to dominate with AI as well, or is its labor displacement going to dominate? And that sort of apocalyptic view, it doesn't go without justification. And that's what makes the forecast so hard, is what are we going to look like? More like the IT workers in the 1990s, or are we ourselves going to look like horses, right, that got dragged off to the graveyard after the cars were adopted?
And so your research project, I mean, where is it pushing you toward?
Okay, so this is where we come in, where we're pushing back a little bit. So a lot of those forecast models, say the majority of them, 99% of them, the AI, when they model it, entering the economy, the AI, I'm going to say, comes from the sky, okay? It is this technology, it shows up, and it displaces workers. Now, I want you to imagine, what is AI that we know it, as researchers, when you look under the hood, it's just a predictive algorithm. It takes in a bunch of data, you ask a question, it turns your question into a vector of a numeric vector, packs it up, attempts to predict the answer in a numeric vector, then unpacks it and gives you the words, okay? And it's good at doing that with mathematical questions, with words, with all sorts of stuff. My undergrads, they've nailed this. They can basically do all their homework with this thing. The flip side of that is those algorithms, they have to be trained. They came from a body of knowledge, okay? And where we push back is that the AI, the next level of problems that we solve, the next predictions, when you answer that next question at your service company, how you deal with customer X's unique problem, you will have to train that AI on in-house data. And why do I say in-house data? Well, do you think that banks are going to send their transaction data out of house to these AI firms? Do you think the hospitals are going to take Kyle and Chris's medical records and send them to the AI firms. It's very unlikely. And for that reason, you're always going to have, just like with software, some kind of customization that's happening within the firm. And that pumps the brakes a little bit on these apocalyptic predictions. And in our simulations, we really take this seriously. We try to figure out how we learn, how fast companies are learning about what their workers do. And again, that looks like it's not an immediate process. It's a fairly slow process. Well, slow maybe in the sense of modern TikTok era, fast in the sense of technologies as they're adopted in historic context, but the typical time it takes. So what we do is we take a bunch of resume data. Okay, so Chris, maybe you're on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I imagine a lot of we're all on LinkedIn. And you want to show off your skills, right? So on LinkedIn, you're going to say things like, I implemented a machine learning algorithm for credit scoring, or I implemented an AI service protocol for my call center. And what we're able to do is pinpoint when these firms, using their worker resumes, have adopted technologies, okay? So we're going to say, when was a certain occupation affected by AI? And what we do is we say, when did you first hire that call center worker? When did you first hire that credit scoring forecaster? And then measure in the LinkedIn data up to the time that you first start saying that AI is doing the job. Okay, and that gap, that 1 or 2 year gap, tells us a speed of learning. Okay, how quickly can this company basically figure out what you're doing and stick AI in instead of you? And that takes something like 2 to 4 years is what we're estimating. So this won't be immediate and conditional on it happening. I find it highly unlikely that a lot of these major corporations are going to fully outsource these tasks.
So I'm also curious. There was there was a conference recently in Berkeley, and it was on progress, and a lot of it dealt with AI. And it kept, and one of the quotes, the massive changes coming from AI will require rapid reskilling in the country. We hear that a lot. We need reskilling, we need retraining. But what does that mean? Because it sounds right, but
questions. Yeah, no, that's exactly the right question. What does that mean? Yeah, how do we adapt? Horses have a hard time getting retrained to do other tasks, and that did not go well for them. Humans, on the other hand, have a long tradition of adapting to change. But let's take it a step further. Let's ask what the data, the numbers say. Okay, so AI comes along and it can do a lot of what you do. You are a call center worker. Okay. A lot of the forecasts, so again, this is where our research enters the realm. A lot of these models are forecasting. What is AI going to do to the economy? 90% of those models have no worker retraining. They don't entertain the idea that humans will adapt. I have an old set of colleagues at the New York Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Laura Pilosoff and Ben Hyman have been working very hard on linking what used to be the Workforce Act retraining tools, and linking those with worker outcomes, but looking at those who were exposed or potentially displaced by AI. How well did they do when they had some retraining support, some occupational retraining support to either switch occupations, right, like enter healthcare, other sectors that are less exposed to AI? Or how well did those do that stayed in the AI exposed occupation? Okay, so the ones that I'm a software programmer, I'm going to say I'm highly exposed, I got displaced, but I want to retrain and be a better software programmer. The returns continue to be phenomenal. So in the past, before all of this AI stuff, you said, look, you go to community college and you get an associate's degree. You're looking at a return in the labor market of something like 10 to 15%. Okay, so it always paid money to go back and study. And community colleges are the greatest gem in this country. More people should take advantage of that. The AI retraining results of Ben and Laura suggest that it's not that different, right? There will always be this large sector of healthcare and education and leisure and services where it will be less exposed to AI. And conditional on being exposed to AI, they're arguing that people are able to adapt and figure out how to be complementary with AI. So my view is that, and I think some of the research now is coming down on that, we can retrain, but long run forecasts are difficult, very difficult to forecast. So that's where I think I find this research very valuable, is that we need to dig more. We need to get better data and randomly assign. So that study that I mentioned before, what happened was there was retraining of these workers, but it wasn't randomly assigned. Okay, so Chris and Kyle lose our jobs, and then you decided to do the retraining, and I didn't. And what they try to do is match Chris with his doppelganger and match me with my doppelganger and look at outcomes. But really, what we want is somebody comes down and hands a research institute $1 million and figures out that Chris got displaced from an AI intensive job, and here's we're going to randomly tap one of us on the head and see who does better, and give them different training protocols. That has yet to be done. Until that's done, it's going to be hard to say with surety whether or not there's going to be an ability to retrain these workers. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you when I knew we were going to do this interview is this aside. There was a paper by Eric Brynjolfsson and some colleagues, and they were inside one large software company that services small businesses and using AI. I'm sure you know about this study. But they had this aside that AI didn't improve the productivity of the really skilled workers. But what it did is it really improved the productivity of the less skilled or the less experienced worker. And so they just raised the question. They said they took no position, but they said this raises the question, who gets paid more, at least on a relative scale, with this kind of result? And I'm curious, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it really comes down to that intensive and extensive marches. Let me just explain what I mean by that. So at the bottom end, there will be some improvements, right? So conditional on keeping my job, I am a low skill worker. Perhaps I can learn very quickly. Now I can learn a lot faster. I don't need to be calling up my boss and asking every little thing to them. There's some way that I can train myself, right? On the other hand, if it can fully displace, and among a lot of low skill workers, it looks like it can fully displace certain tasks, those individuals will lose their job, right? So conditional on keeping a job, maybe we'll see some wage compression. But those studies, Eric's top researcher, those studies are high quality, but very specific to certain industries. And until we do this at sort of a wider scale, it's going to be difficult to answer. It is true. If you look at the top 10, so I think I have a list here. You guys can't see it, but I can read off of it. If you look at, so part of this study is that I'm discussing is joint work with Brian Sigmiller, Larry Schmidt, and Dimitris Papanikolaou, who have been working on the empirics of AI adoption for quite some time. And one of the key metrics that we use in the learning speeds is an exposure metric, just how exposed are we, Kyle and Chris, in our occupations, journalism and economics to AI. And if you look at the top 10 look like very high skilled workers. Okay, so you got computer and information systems managers, statisticians, computer hardware engineers, database administrators, logisticians, software developers, mathematical science occupations, including all other, computer use support specialists. And if you keep going, basically, if you have data or you have analyst in the name of your occupation, you're going to have to adapt or do some retraining, because the AI can do a lot of what you do.
So in the slides,
And journalists
that
are not on there, so you're okay for a
I'm
little
skeptical,
while.
but okay, that sounds good. So in your slides, you have this AI is experience good.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So that's the core of this idea that, okay, if I can just look at Chris and say, I don't need to hire him, but I see Chris and I want somebody like Chris, and I can make an AI to do Chris's job, I'm going to call that inspection good. I could just see you and implement the AI and I'm done. Experience goods are, we talk about these in durable goods. It's like you got to go and you got to drive the car to see how it works. And you learn new features about the car as you drive it more and more, right? And that's what we think AI is like, is I have to learn from these workers. We think that these forces are strong enough. So we take our model. So again, the advances over what other people have done are precisely, we make AI and experience good. You have to learn. There's a component that hospitals, for the next procedure, they're going to have to learn from the doctors. The banks, for the next financial product, are going to have to learn from their financial engineers, and then simulate widespread AI adoption. We push the cost of adoption so low that 60 to 80% of firms use the technologies. And what we find in the long run is that the job creation margin wins. There's new work that's created. People adapt, they retrain. There are some short-run losses, but in the long run, at least with current technologies and what we're able to do with forecasting and put a big confidence interval on this, is that it's going to look a lot more like computers than we are going to look like horses.
So we don't have to throw out our labor market models.
Hopefully not. I'm hoping not. So I am a bit of a biased researcher here, but we came in with an open mind and we thought, let's model this properly. And yeah, your conclusion's approximately correct at this point, is that we will still have business cycles. There will be temporary unemployment. People will retrain. And in the long run, job creation will march forward.
Well, thank you very much. We could keep going. I've loved this conversation, but I really appreciate you taking your time.
Likewise, Chris, I enjoyed this. You always have great questions. So thanks for the questions, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Kyle Herkenhoff is an economics professor at the University of Minnesota. Office Hours is a production of Matriarch Digital Media, hosted by me, Chris Farrell. Executive producer, Twyla Dang. Producer and editor, Lushik Lotusli. Music by Bob Bradley.